Good morning. I suspect that the poem I selected for this morning's reading, which our readers did a beautiful job with, might be one of the stranger offerings ever heard in a Westover chapel service, but I wanted to share it with you as a starting point for my talk today. I do so not because I consider it a stunning work of poetry. If I had dared to make that claim, I suspect the members of the English department, several of whom are represented upstairs, led by Bruce Coffin, would collectively pounce on me immediately after today's chapel service and pummel me to death with their copies of Warner's. And I probably wouldn't blame them if they had done so. Clearly, The Blind Man and the Elephant is not a poem that would ever find its way into the pages of Westover's Lantern magazine. Nevertheless, I confess that I have had a lifelong affection for this poem. And looking backward across a half century to those days when I first read it as a child, I realized that this poem planted the seeds of core beliefs and attitudes that have grown within me over the years. I first found this tale of the elephant and the blind men on the pages of the first volume of our family's Childcraft Encyclopedia. This was a collection of 15 books devoted to poems, fairy tales, music, and an assortment of crafts and arts projects deemed suitable for children, but which frankly looked really boring to me, even to my young eyes. In preparing for this talk, I'd asked my two sisters if they could recall how this set of encyclopedias had found their way into our family's bookcase. They didn't know for sure, but suspected, as I did, that my mother might have acquired them the way she had obtained other sets of books for us. She probably bought them at the local First National supermarket, which in the decades following World War II would offer inexpensive encyclopedias and other child-friendly literature alongside the usual assortment of grocery items. A new volume would go on sale each week, and so my parents, like other working-class mothers and fathers of that era who had growing baby boomer families, saw these books as a way to encourage their children's imaginations and, they hoped, a love for reading. At least in my own case, these books did the trick, and I remember spending many hours leafing through all of the ones that filled our bookcase. But of all the poems and stories I read, it is The Blind Man and the Elephant that has somehow stayed most deeply embedded in my memory. I think what first caught my eye was the set of watercolor drawings that accompanied the poem. They depicted, in what now would clearly be considered a decidedly politically incorrect manner, 6 very odd-looking men, complete with beards and turbans, their eyes closed to signify their blindness. The 6 men surrounded a comically panic-stricken elephant who clearly did not enjoy having these odd little men yanking, pawing, and otherwise grappling with its various body parts. But beyond the amusing drawings, even my unsophisticated 8-year-old mind was intrigued by the ultimate message of the poem, that these men of Indostan could each grasp, literally, what a part of the elephant appeared to resemble, but had no idea what the whole creature really was like. That each of them had a piece of the truth, which they mistook for the whole truth, and that they therefore dismissed one another's observations that contradicted their own beliefs and experiences. And so, as the poet concludes, each was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. That wonderful paradox delighted my 8-year-old mind, and frankly, it still tickles my 58-year-old one as well. What I have discovered in the intervening decades is that Saxe's poem was in fact a British Victorian version of a parable that originated in India centuries and centuries before, and which had become part of many religious traditions and the subject of Buddhist, Sufi, and Hindu stories. Sometimes the men in the tale are not blind, but simply groping about in the dark. In other versions, a king or a wise man intervenes and explains to the men why they need to share their knowledge to get a complete picture of the elephant. By the time I was in high school, this poem and all the other stories in doggerel in the Childcraft Encyclopedia were seemingly forgotten. The books remained firmly closed upon the bookshelf. By then, I discovered a love for movies, and when I wasn't spending as much of my free time as I could watching films, I was often reading about them. Somewhere along the way, I stumbled across a public television screening of a classic Japanese film called Rashomon, a movie that had been made in 1950 by the esteemed director Akira Kurosawa. Rashomon is set in medieval Japan. It is a story about the murder of a samurai. Or, to put it more accurately, the movie is about the telling of multiple versions of the samurai's murder. The film retraces the events surrounding the murder 4 times, with each version told by a different character: the samurai himself, his wife, the bandit accused of murdering him, and finally by a hidden bystander who witnessed the samurai's death. Each retelling spins the story in a different direction, with one character acting heroically in one version, then appearing as a villain in the next, and then cowardly in the third. By the end of the movie, the viewer cannot tell where the truth lies because of all the contradictory versions of the events. Since it debuted, Rashomon's influence has extended into popular culture and beyond. It has even given rise to a psychological term, the Rashomon effect, which describes the way in which subjective points of view affect memory, including such things as eyewitness accounts in court cases. As a plot device, the Rashomon effect has turned up in movie after movie and TV show after TV show. So much so, unfortunately, that it has become something of a cinematic cliche. Those of you who are fans of the current series How I Met Your Mother, for example, will recognize how the Rashomon effect is used in that show's scripts, as we are frequently treated to differing versions of the adventures of Ted Mosby and his friends. As I've grown older, the lessons offered by both the story of the blind man and the elephant and by Rashomon have kept coming back to me in unexpected ways. In my own life, I've grown over the years profoundly aware of how much I can feel like one of those blind men stumbling around the elephant of life, or one of those reality-twisting characters out of Rashomon. In my first job after college, for example, I was a young newspaper reporter working in northwestern Connecticut. I often found myself covering the same events, small-town government meetings, political campaigns, and the occasional fire and police news, alongside other reporters. When I would sit down afterwards and read my competitors' stories, I was often struck by how often our accounts about the same event could appear so different. Not that the basic facts would be contradicted, but each of us would choose to include particular details or remarks from the story's participants that would tweak or alter the meaning of the story in small but telling ways. If we were covering a Board of Education meeting, for example, one of us might quote the remarks of one of the board members about a particular point of debate, while another reporter might include a different set of remarks from another participant. Both of us could be accurate in what we reported, but our resulting stories would diverge to such a degree that if someone had read both stories, they might question if we were attending the same meeting. In essence, my fellow reporters and I were like the blind men of the poem, each of us partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. Or perhaps not so much in the wrong, but failing to give as complete an account as we might otherwise have given. Not intentionally, certainly, but still coming up short. Looking at our world today, plugged in to an ever-growing and increasingly confusing array of social media options, a 24/7 news cycle offered by too many sources, populated by talking heads who spin interpretations of national and world events even before they are completely over, and a popular culture that celebrates the surreal, manipulated nature of so-called reality television, I fear that more than ever, we are more like the blind men of my children's story, but that it isn't just one elephant that we are encountering, but a whole herd of them, with a gaggle of hippopotamuses, rhinoceroses, and the occasional kangaroo tossed in to increase our confusion. The challenge facing all of us, both as individuals and as a society as a whole, I believe, is to acknowledge that the blind men of the poem and the characters of Rashomon, like them, none of us can truly say that we have all the facts on our own, that we need to be open and to listen to one another more carefully, and to share the shards of truth that each of us have managed to stumble over in our lives. Thank you.